Section 7 of Divots by P.G. Wodehouse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chester Forgets Himself, Part 2. When I arrived, he was practicing chip shots in his sitting room. I noticed that he seemed to be laboring under some strong emotion, and his first words gave me the clue. "She's going away tomorrow," he said abruptly, lofting a ball over the whatnot onto the Chesterfield. I was not sure whether I was sorry or relieved. Her absence would leave a terrible blank, of course, but it might be that it would help him to get over his infatuation. "Ah," I said, noncommittally. Chester addressed his ball with a well-assumed phlegm, but I could see by the way his ears wiggled that he was feeling deeply. I was not surprised when he topped his shot into the coal scuttle. "She has promised to play a last round with me this morning," he said. Again I was doubtful what view to take. It was a pretty, poetic idea, not unlike Browning's last ride together, but I was not sure if it was altogether wise. However, it was none of my business, so I merely patted him on the shoulder, and he gathered up his clubs and went off. Owing to motives of delicacy, I had not offered to accompany him on his round, and it was not till later that I learned the actual details of what occurred. At the start, it seems, the spiritual anguish which he was suffering had a depressing effect on his game. He hooked his drive off the first tee, and was only enabled to get a 5 by means of a strong niblick shot out of the rough. At the second, the lake hole, he lost a ball in the water and got another 5. It was only at the third he began to pull himself together. The test of a great golfer is his ability to recover from a bad start. Chester had this quality to a preeminent degree. A lesser man, conscious of being 3 over bogey for the first 2 holes, might have looked on his round as ruined. To Chester it simply meant that he had to get a couple of birdies right speedily, and he set about it at once. Always a long driver, he excelled himself at the third. It is, as you know, an uphill hole all the way, but his drive could not have come far short of 250 yards. A brassy shot of equal strength and unerring direction put him on the edge of the green, and he holed out with a long putt 2 under bogey. He had hoped for a birdie, and he had achieved an eagle. I think that this splendid feat must have softened Felicia's heart, had it not been for the fact that misery had by this time entirely robbed Chester of the ability to smile. Instead, therefore, of behaving in the wholesome, natural way of men who get 3s at bogey 5 holes, he preserved a drawn, impassive countenance, and as she watched him tee up her ball, stiff, correct, polite, but to all outward appearance absolutely inhuman, the girl found herself stifling that thrill of what for a moment had been almost adoration. It was, she felt, exactly how her brother Crispin would have comported himself if he had done a hole in 2 under bogey. And yet she could not altogether check a wistful sigh when, after a couple of 4s at the next 2 holes, he picked up another stroke on the 6th, and with an inspired spoon shot brought his medal score down 1 better than bogey by getting a 2 at the 177-yard 7th. But the brief spasm of tenderness passed, and when he finished the first 9 with 2 more 4s, she refrained from anything warmer than a mere word of stereotyped congratulation. 1 under bogey for the first time, she said. Splendid. 1 under bogey, said Chester woodenly. Out in 34. What is the record for the course? Chester started. So great had been his preoccupation that he had not given a thought to the course record. He suddenly realized now that the pro, who had done the lowest medal score to date, the other course record was held by Peter Willard with 161, achieved in his first session, had gone out in only 1 better than his own figures that day. 68, he said. What a pity you lost those strokes at the beginning. Yes, said Chester. He spoke absently, and, as it seemed to her, primly and without enthusiasm, for the flaming idea of having to go at the course record had only just occurred to him. Once before he had done the first 9 in 34, but on that occasion he had not felt that curious feeling of irresistible force which comes to a golfer at the very top of his form. Then he had been aware all the time that he had been putting chancily. They had gone in, yes, but he had uttered a prayer per putt. Today he was superior to any weak doubtings. When he tapped the ball on the green, he knew it was going to sink. The course record? Why not? What a last offering to lay at her feet! She would go away, out of his life forever. She would marry some other bird, but the memory of that supreme round would remain with her as long as she breathed. When he won the Open and Amateur for the second, the third, the fourth time, she would say to herself, "I was with him when he dented the record for his home course." And he had only to pick up a couple of strokes on the last 9 to do 3s at holes where he was wont to be satisfied with 4s. Yes, by Varden, he would take a whirl at it. You, who are acquainted with these links, will no doubt say that the task which Chester Meredith had sketched out for himself, cutting 2 strokes off 35 for the second 9, was one at which humanity might well shudder. The pro himself, who had finished 6th in the last Open Championship, had never done better than a 35, playing perfect golf and being 1 under par. But such was Chester's mood that, as he teed up on the 10th, he did not even consider the possibility of failure. Every muscle in his body was working in perfect coordination with its fellows. His wrists felt as if they were made of tempered steel, and his eyes had just that hawk-like quality which enables a man to judge his short approaches to the inch. He swung forcefully, and the ball sailed so close to the direction post that for a moment it seemed as if it had hit it. "Ooh!" cried Felicia. Chester did not speak. He was following the flight of the ball. It sailed over the brow of the hill, and with his knowledge of the course he could almost tell the exact patch of turf on which it must have come to rest. An iron would do the business from here, and a single putt would give him the first of the birdies he required. 2 minutes later he had holed out a 6-foot putt for a 3. "Ooh!" said Felicia again. Chester walked to the 11th tee in silence. "No, never mind," she said, as he stooped to put her ball on the sand. "I don't think I'll play any more. I'd much rather just watch you." "Oh, that you would watch me through life?" said Chester, but he said it to himself. His actual words were, "Very well," and he spoke them with a stiff coldness which chilled the girl. The 11th is one of the trickiest holes on the course, as no doubt you have found out for yourself. It looks absurdly simple, but that little patch of wood on the right that seems so harmless is placed just in the deadliest position to catch even the most slightly sliced drive. Chester's lacked the austere precision of his last. 100 yards from the tee it swerved almost imperceptibly, and striking a branch, fell in the tangled undergrowth. It took him 2 strokes to hack it out and put it on the green, and then his long putt, after quivering on the edge of the hole, stayed there. For a swift instant red-hot words rose to his lips, but he caught them just as they were coming out and crushed them back. He looked at his ball and he looked at the hole. "Tut!" said Chester. Felicia uttered a deep sigh. The niblick shot out of the rough had impressed her profoundly. If only, she felt, this superb golfer had been more human. If only she were able to be constantly in this man's society, to see exactly what it was that he did with his left wrist that gave that terrific snap to his drives, she might acquire the knack herself one of these days. For she was a clear-thinking, honest girl, and thoroughly realized that she did not get the distance she ought to with her wood. With a husband like Chester beside her to stimulate and advise, of what might she not be capable? If she got wrong in her stance, he would put her right with a word. If she had a bout of slicing, how quickly he would tell her what caused it. And she knew that she had only to speak the word to wipe out the effects of her refusal, to bring him to her side forever. But could a girl pay such a price? When he had got that eagle on the third, he had looked bored. When he had missed his last putt, he had not seemed to care. Tut! What a word to use in such a moment! No, she felt sadly it could not be done. To marry Chester Meredith, she told herself, would be like marrying a composite of Soames Forsyte, Sir Willoughby Patterne, and all her brother Crispin's friends. She sighed and was silent. Chester, standing on the 12th tee, reviewed the situation swiftly, like a general before a battle. There were 7 holes to play, and he had to do these in 2 better than bogey. The one that faced him now offered few opportunities. It was a long, slogging, dog-leg hole, and even Ray and Taylor, when they had played their exhibition game on the course, had taken 5s. No opening there. The 13th, up a steep hill with a long iron shot for 1 second and a blind green fringed with bunkers? Scarcely practicable to hope for better than a 4. The 14th, into the valley with the ground sloping sharply down to the ravine. He had once done it in 3, but it had been a fluke. No, on these 3 holes he must be content to play for a steady par and trust to picking up a stroke on the 15th. The 15th, straightforward up to the plateau green with its circle of bunkers, presents few difficulties to the finished golfer who is on his game. A bunker meant nothing to Chester in his present conquering vein. His massy shot second soared almost contemptuously over the chasm, and rolled to within a foot of the pin. He came to the 16th with the clear-cut problem before him of snipping 2 strokes off par on the last 3 holes. To the unthinking man, not acquainted with the layout of our links, this would no doubt appear a tremendous feat. But the fact is, the Greens Committee, with perhaps an unduly sentimental bias towards the happy ending, have arranged a comparatively easy finish to the course. The 16th is a perfectly plain hole with a broad fairway and a downhill run. The 17th, a one-shot affair with no difficulties for the man who keeps them straight. And the 18th, though its uphill run makes it deceptive to the stranger, and leads the unwary to take a mashie instead of a light iron for his second, has no real venom in it. Even Peter Willard has occasionally come home in a canter with a 6, 5, and 7, seating himself only to 8-foot putts. It is, I think, this mild conclusion to a tough course that makes the refreshment room of our club so noticeable for its sea of happy faces. The bar every day is crowded with rejoicing men who, forgetting the agonies of the first 15, are babbling of what they did on the last 3. The 17th, with its possibilities of holing out a top second, is particularly soothing. Chester Meredith was not the man to top his second on any hole, so this supreme bliss did not come his way, but he laid a beautiful mashie shot dead and got a 3. And when with his iron he put his first well on the green at the 17th and holed out for a 2, life, for all his broken heart, seemed pretty tolerable. He now had the situation well in hand. He had only to play his usual game to get a 4 on the last and lower the course record by 1 stroke. It was at this supreme moment of his life that he run into the wrecking crew. You doubtless find it difficult to understand how it came about that if the wrecking crew were on the course at all, he had not run into them long before. The explanation is that, with a regard for the etiquette of the game unusual in these miserable men, they had for once obeyed the law that in acts that foursome shall start at the 10th. They had begun their dark work on the second 9, accordingly, at almost the exact moment when Chester Meredith was driving off at the first, and this had enabled them to keep ahead until now. When Chester came to the 18th tee, they were just leaving it, moving up the fairway with their caddies in mass formation, and looking to his exasperated eye like one of those great race migrations of the Middle Ages. Whenever Chester looked, he seemed to see human, so to speak, figures. One was doddering about in the long grass 50 yards from the tee, others debouched to left and right. The course was crawling with them. Chester sat down on the bench with a weary sigh. He knew these men. Self-centered, remorseless, deaf to all the promptings of their better nature, they never let anyone through. There was nothing to do but wait. The wrecking crew scratched on. The man near the tee rolled his ball 10 yards, then 20, then 30. He was improving. Ere long he would be out of range. Chester rose and swished his driver. But the end was not yet. The individual operating in the rough on the left had been advancing in slow stages, and now, finding his ball teed up on a tuft of grass, he opened his shoulders and let himself go. There was a loud report, and the ball, hitting a tree squarely, bounded back almost to the tee, and all the weary work was to do again. By the time Chester was able to drive, he was reduced by impatience, and the necessity of refraining from commenting on the state of affairs as he would have wished to comment, to a frame of mind in which no man could have kept himself from pressing. He pressed, and topped. The ball skidded over the turf for a meager 100 yards. "Dear me," said Chester. The next moment he uttered a bitter laugh. Too late a miracle had happened. One of the foul figures in front was waving its club. The other ghastly creatures were withdrawing to the side of the fairway. Now, when the harm had been done, these outcasts were signaling him to go through. The hollow mockery of the thing swept over Chester like a wave. What was the use of going through now? He was a good 300 yards from the green, and he needed bogey at this hole to break the record. Almost absently he drew his brassey from his bag. Then, as the full sense of his wrongs bit into his soul, he swung viciously. Golf is a strange game. Chester had pressed on the tee and foozled. He pressed now, and achieved the most perfect shot of his life. The ball shot from its place as if a charge of powerful explosive were behind it. Never deviating from a straight line, never more than 6 feet from the ground, it sailed up the hill, crossed the bunker, eluded the mounds beyond, struck the turf, rolled, and stopped 50 feet from the hole. It was a brassy shot of a lifetime, and the shrill, senile yippings of excitement and congratulation floated down from the wrecking crew. For, degraded though they were, these men were not wholly devoid of human instincts. Chester drew a deep breath. His ordeal was over. That third shot, which would lay the ball right up to the pin, was precisely the sort of thing he did best. Almost from boyhood he had been a wizard at the short approach. He could hole out now in two, now on his left ear. He strode up the hill to his ball. It could not have been lying better. 2 inches away there was a nasty cup in the turf, but it had avoided this and was sitting nicely perched up, smiling an invitation to the mashing niblick. Chester shuffled his feet and eyed the flag keenly. Then he stooped to play, and Felicia watched him breathlessly. Her whole being seemed to be concentrated on him. She had forgotten everything save that she was seeing a course record get broken. She could not have been more wrapped up in his success if she had had large sums of money on it. The wrecking crew, meanwhile, had come to life again. They had stopped twittering about Chester's brassy shot and were thinking of resuming their own game. Even in foursomes where 50 yards is reckoned a good shot, somebody must be away, and the man whose turn it was to play was the one who had acquired from his brother members of the club the nickname of the first gravedigger. A word about this human win. He was, if there can be said to be grades in such a subspecies, the star performer of the wrecking crew. The lunches of 57 years had caused his chest to slip down into the mezzanine floor, but he was still a powerful man, and had in his youth been a hammer-thrower of some repute. He differed from his colleagues, the man with the hoe, old Father Time, and Consul, the almost human, in that, while they were content to peck cautiously at the ball, he never spared himself in his efforts to do it a violent injury. Frequently he had cut a blue dot almost in half with his niblick. He was completely muscle-bound, so that he seldom achieved anything beyond a series of chasms in the turf. But he was always trying, and it was his secret belief that, given 2 or 3 miracles happening simultaneously, he would one of these days bring off a snifter. Years of disappointment had, however, reduced the flood of hope to a mere trickle, and when he took his brassey now and addressed the ball, he had no immediate plans beyond a vague intention of rolling the thing a few yards farther up the hill. The fact that he had no business to play at all till Chester had holed out did not occur to him, and even if it had occurred, he would have dismissed the objection as finicking. Chester, bending over his ball, was nearly 200 yards away, or the distance of 3 full brassey shots. The first gravedigger did not hesitate. He whirled up his club as in distant days he had been wont to swing the hammer, and with the grunt which his performance always wrung from him, brought it down. Golfers, and I stretch this term to include the wrecking crew, are a highly imitative race. The spectacle of a flubber flubbing ahead of us on the fairway inclines to make us flub as well, and conversely, it is immediately after we have seen a magnificent shot that we are apt to eclipse ourselves. Consciously, the gravedigger had no notion how Chester had made that superb brassy biff of his, but all the while I suppose his subconscious self had been taking notes. At any rate, on this one occasion he, too, did the shot of a lifetime. As he opened his eyes, which he always shut tightly at the moment of impact, and started to unravel himself from the complicated tangle in which his follow-through had left him, he perceived the ball breasting the hill like some untamed jackrabbit of the Californian prairie. For a moment his only emotion was one of dream-like amazement. He stood looking at the ball with a wholly impersonal wonder, like a man suddenly confronted with some terrific work of nature. Then, as a sleep-walker awakens, he came to himself with a start. Directly in front of the flying ball was a man bending to make an approach shot. Chester, always a concentrated golfer when there was a man's work to do, had scarcely heard the crack of the brassey behind him. Certainly he had paid no attention to it. His whole mind was fixed on his stroke. He measured with his eye the distance to the pin, noted the downslope of the green, and shifted his stance a little to allow for it. Then, with a final swift waggle, he laid his club head behind the ball and slowly raised it. It was just coming down when the world became full of shouts of "4!" and something hard smote him violently on the seat of his +4s. The supreme tragedies of life leave us momentarily stunned. For an instant which seemed an age, Chester could not understand what had happened. Truly, he realized that there had been an earthquake, a cloudburst, a railway accident, and that a high building had fallen on him at the exact moment when somebody had shot him with a gun. But these happenings would account only for a small part of his sensations. He blinked several times, and rolled his eyes wildly. And it was while rolling them that he caught sight of the gesticulating wrecking crew on the lower slopes and found enlightenment. Simultaneously he observed his ball only 1.5 yards from where it had been when he addressed it. Chester Meredith gave one look at his ball, one look at the flag, one look at the wrecking crew, one look at the sky. His lips writhed, his forehead turned vermilion. Beads of perspiration started out on his forehead. And then, with his whole soul seething like a cistern struck by a thunderbolt, he spoke. "Ay!" cried Chester. Dimly he was aware of a wordless exclamation from the girl beside him, but he was too distraught to think of her now. It was as if all the oaths pent up within his bosom for so many weary days were struggling and jostling to see which could get out first. They cannoned into each other. They linked hands and formed parties. They got themselves all mixed up in weird vowel sounds, the second syllable of some red-hot verb forming a temporary union with the first syllable of some blistering noun. "Blankety blank blank blank!" cried Chester. Felicia stood staring at him. In her eyes was the look of one who sees visions. "Blankety blank blank blankety blank!" roared Chester in part. A great wave of emotion flooded over the girl. How she had misjudged this silver-tongued man! She shivered as she thought that, had this not happened, in another 5 minutes they would have parted forever, sundered by seas of misunderstanding, she cold and scornful, he with all his music still within him. "Oh, Mr. Meredith!" she cried faintly. With a sickening abruptness Chester came to himself. It was as if somebody had poured a pint of ice-cold water down his back. He blushed vividly. He realized with horror and shame how grossly he had offended against all the canons of decency and good taste. He felt like the man in one of those "what is wrong with this picture" things in the advertisements of the etiquette books. I beg your pardon," he mumbled humbly. Please forgive me. I should have not spoken like that." You should," cried the girl passionately. "You should have said all that and a lot more. That awful man ruining your record round like that. Oh, why am I a poor weak woman with practically no vocabulary that's any use for anything?" Quite suddenly, without knowing that she had moved, she found herself at his side, holding his hand. "Oh, to think how I misjudged you," she wailed. "I thought you cold, stiff, formal, precise. I hated the way you sniggered when you foozled a shot. I see it all now. You were keeping it in for my sake. Can you ever forgive me?" Chester, as I have said, was not a very quick-minded young man, but it would have taken a duller youth than he to fail to read the message in the girl's eyes, to miss the meaning of the pressure of her hand on his. "My gosh!" he exclaimed wildly. "Do you mean? Do you think? Do you really? Honestly, has this made a difference? Is there any chance for a fellow, I mean?" Her eyes helped him on. He felt suddenly confident and masterful. "Look here, no kidding. Will you marry me?" he said. I will. "Darling!" cried Chester. He would have said more, but at this point he was interrupted by the arrival of the wrecking crew, who had panted up full of apologies, and Chester, as he eyed them, thought that he had never seen a nicer, cheerier, pleasanter lot of fellows in his life. His heart warmed to them. He made a mental resolve to hunt them up some time and have a good long talk. He waved the gravedigger's remorse airily aside. "Don't mention it," he said. "Not at all. Faults on both sides. By the way, my fiancée, Miss Blakeney." The wrecking crew puffed acknowledgment. "But, my dear fellow," said the gravedigger, it was unforgivable. Spoiling your shot. Never dreamed I would send the ball that distance. Lucky you weren't playing an important match." "But he was," moaned Felicia. "He was trying for the course record, and now he can't break it." The wrecking crew paled behind their whiskers, aghast at this tragedy, but Chester, glowing with the yeasty intoxication of love, laughed lightly. "What do you mean, can't break it?" he cried cheerily. "I've one more shot." And, carelessly addressing the ball, he holed out with a light flick of his mashie niblick. "Chester, darling," said Felicia. They were walking slowly through a secluded glade in the quiet evenfall. "Yes, precious?" Felicia hesitated. What she was going to say would hurt him, she knew, and her love was so great that to hurt him was agony. "Do you think," she began, "I wonder whether it's about Crispin." "Good old Crispin." Felicia sighed, but the matter was too vital to be shirked. Cost what it might, she must speak her mind. "Chester, darling, when we are married, would you mind very, very much if we didn't have Crispin with us all the time?" Chester started. "Good Lord!" he exclaimed. "Don't you like him?" "Not very much," confessed Felicia. "I don't think I'm clever enough for him. I've rather disliked him ever since we were children. But I know what a friend he is of yours." Chester uttered a joyous laugh. "Friend of mine! Why, I can't stand the blighter. I loathe the worm. I abominate the excrescence. I only pretended we were friends because I thought it would put me in solid with you. The man is a pest and should have been strangled at birth. At school I used to kick him every time I saw him. If your brother Crispin tries so much as to set foot across the threshold of our little home, I'll set the dog on him." "Darling," whispered Felicia, "we shall be very, very happy." She drew her arm through his. "Tell me, dearest," she murmured, "all about how you used to kick Crispin at school." And together they wandered off into the sunset. End of section 7.